Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com. I am your host, Brent Skinner, and at HR.com I do several things, Future of Payroll, online community, executive lead, write for the publications, all sorts of things, but enough about me. You're all here for my guest, who is Ram Mittana. Welcome, Ram.
Thank you so much, Brent. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I've heard all of your, podcasts, and it's wonderful. So thank you for having me again.
Oh, thank you very much. Always, very honored to hear when someone's actually watching the podcast. Appreciate it so much. Now, you are Senior Manager of HRIS at NSF, which is an environmental safety company that's been around for 80 years. So you're sort of paying attention to environmental safety before it was cool to do so. And you have a really interesting story around, IT and how it can be a career path into HCM in ways. And also we're going to talk about sort of selecting enterprise software and this sort of thing today as well. But first, it's going to be a great conversation. But first, as I like to ask all my guests, what gets you going every day? What sort of motivates you every day when it comes to human capital management, the management of the employment of people, and the intersection with your IT work?
Absolutely. Now that's a great start. I was going to say, I think it's more of a personal moment for me than anything related to this, right? My father, actually said that nothing is more important than life. That was his last statement before he passed, and that was kind of a key statement that drives sort of everything in my life ever since then. So when I started in with my work, I always made sure that anything and everything that I do actually makes an impact to people, right? So as you see that everything that I do, whether in IT or HR or whatever area that I work on, is all related to people, right? So that's my thing, and that's actually a statement that I got from father, and that's what keeps me, going every time I do something. And
Yeah.
I was going to say a little more detailed, right? I think when I started with IT, right, the first thing that I went into was customer support, right, because that has got to do a lot of people engagement. Because I always
Mm.
like to interact with people, so I started with customer support in IT, and I've done a lot of work in that space, right? And eventually, I realized that hey, there is a particular way of interacting with people. You need to understand more of their emotions and not just solving the technical problems. And that's when I slowly moved from IT into into the HR world. And it wasn't like a drastic transformation. I woke up suddenly the next day morning, hey, I declared I'm a HR guy, I'm not an IT guy. you know I started with IT. I slowly developed all of my skills in terms of understanding how the HR operates, how does HR work really, what are the KPIs, what are the different terms that I need to understand, and also how to interact with people, right? That's the most
Mm.
important thing I felt was was the key driver for working in HR, and that's how I moved into the HR world slowly.
Mhm. Oh, that's really, really interesting. And I've spoken with others in over the past several years on a previous podcast of mine, even where there's this IT element, this IT expertise that really does lend itself to working in the HCM space, specifically HCM software. I spoke with a fellow earlier this year, this year that's almost over when we're recording right now. Most of you who are watching will see this sometime in late January, early February, but
Right.
so it is still 2025 right now. And spoke with a fellow who has an IT background, and he also works in with the HRIS. And the topic of that particular podcast was around, how your HRIS can help with onboarding with mergers and acquisitions and sort of thing to keep things smooth. Spoke with a fellow way back who was a total IT guy through and through. And we'll show you how long ago this was. It was back when Ultimate Software wasn't part of UKG. Um,
Right.
and his organization needed somebody to kind of, just helm things from a software standpoint with the Ultimate Software deployment, and he derived a lot of satisfaction from that. So, you know, in terms of the sort of trends in the space, do you see this as sort of reflect? I mean, because this could just be me accidentally running into three people who happen to do this, right? It's always possible.
Right.
I like to think, we all like to think that our anecdotes are trends, like verifiable, bona fide trends. But
Sure.
have you noticed anything in the space where there's sort of IT movement into specialization, whether it's HCM or other areas of the enterprise?
Well, yes and no, right? Especially in the HR world. I've seen this happening more often, purely because as you start understanding the technology, HR is a different game, right? It's one to do with tech, right? You build a bunch of stuff that you build it for user experience, you build it for improving the quality, drive some nice KPIs and all of that. But you need to understand the HR language as well, right? Transitioning into HR world, I would say, is not that easy, purely
Mhm.
because it's one to build the tech, but also at the same time, you need to understand how to explain that tech in the most non-techy way, right?
Yeah.
That's the key HR skill. Being able to explain to a HR person as to how we're building this technology and why we're doing this or building this technology, that's where I think the HRIS transition happens, and then you will see a HRIS leader popping in. Is that
Mhm.
a natural quality for everybody? I don't think so, or I'm not sure, right? But if we are able to build that muscle of explaining things in the most non technical way, then I think HRIS transition would be an easier task.
Yeah, yeah, and it could be that, the contingent of IT folks that have that soft skill are sort of poised, primed to make that sort of leap should they wish to do so. Um,
True.
let's talk about HRISs now.
Sure.
I know that you have some very strong, well-informed opinions around this topic. So I'm going to read the question that we came up with. So I don't normally read, but I'm going to read on the
Sure.
podcast. I do read. But anyway, when an organization believes it needs a new HRIS, what diagnostic steps can help determine whether the real issues lie in the technology itself or in underlying processes and workflows?
Sure. I think that's a great question. Especially, this is the one question that I think kind of haunts most of the HRIS leaders in general, right? Hey, we're looking at a new tech. What do we do? Right? Is this the right time to look at the new tech? Or what are the steps? What are the checklist, right? Sort of checklist questions that I would take before I look into a new system, right? I would say a few, right? One is the foundational information, and any HRIS system runs basically on two things. One is the data, and the other one's the processes. Before we evaluate a new system, I think we need to be very um, aware whether our data and the processes are up to the mark. The first thing I would do as a diagnostic would be to make sure that whether my processes are working in the most seamless way, or have they been optimized to the maximum, right? I haven't. I mean, in my experience, many a times we think that our processes are operating in the best way, but there are always some gaps, right? So we have to be very, very thorough of looking at each process skeptically and say, hey, look, there is a scope for improvement. I think
Mm,
everybody has to go through that exercise and make sure that their processes are up to date. Whether we go with a new system or not, it doesn't really matter. But having that assurance in place would be the most um, bang for buck, I would say, before you look for a new system. The second thing would be the data, right? Data is the other foundational element, especially in the HR world. The data forms, I mean, not just HR, but in any world, if you say the data is like the foundation, having the right combination and the right information in the right place is the key, right? Many a
mm.
times we would see duplicate information, having two candidates with the same name and same email, all of that information has to be validated, because if the data is not good, you put it on any system, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to be a bad system, right? It's garbage in, garbage out, right? But those are the two key factors I would first look at and make sure that
Mm,
we've validated those. And if we still see a problem, then it's a problem with the system. And
mm.
many a times it has got to do with the user experience, right? The systems usually have similar set of capabilities, but it all ends up with how the user or I as an employer, as a manager, feel when I use the system. I guess that's where we need to be double checking on the experience.
I can see, so that's really good advice. And so a couple things. First, it occurred to me just now that you could have um, sort of bad fundamentals, like the two areas of to be aware of that you mentioned, and also have a bad user experience just because of the technology. So,
Exactly.
but it's always good to start with the fundamentals anyway, no matter what, because
Sure.
because if those are in place, if those are in order, right, then it'll take you less time even just to kind of figure out what to do next.
100%. 100%. Right. And especially now that we've talked a little bit about the data and and process foundations, there's a very specific set of ways of attacking that and making sure that the data is accurate. And then we can build some AI, models to make sure that there is continuous review of the data, and then have the right governance in place just to make sure that is tight, right? Setting up or doing data cleanup once as a one-time activity is one thing, but then keeping it up to date is another activity. So as a HRIS leader, we would be very cool and very happy to say that, hey, I've fixed this data now. But then a month from now, it'll all be broken again. So make sure that you have governance in place to audit the data and keep fixing it, right? That's one of the advice that I would suggest. I would give. And the other one to do with processes is, with the advent of AI, there's always scope of improving and automating, right? So when we're looking at any process in general, it could be onboarding, offboarding, terminations, hiring, whatever. Make sure that you're looking at it from an AI lens, right?
Mm,
Um, and we've done this internally as well, and we found out there is some good scope of fixing or improving the quality of a process by introducing AI. And so,
mm,
for example, if you look at the performance process today, our leaders spend or used to spend a lot of time in writing comments as an year-end process for their employees. But now then, we started looking at, hey, how can we improve the quality of this process? And we introduced AI into pre-populating those comment section based on the history or how the employee has performed throughout the year. And AI has its own pros and cons, right? It does generate the data or the comment section, but I, as a manager, has to be very careful in reviewing it and
mm.
confirming whether it is accurate or not. So there is a way to improve the processes by looking at it from an AI lens, and I would strongly suggest every leader to do that.
It's interesting. So first of all, thank you for bringing up AI.
Right.
We have an unbroken streak here now. We've spoken about AI, I think, in every single podcast episode of the year,
Right.
and we wouldn't want to end now. So thank you for that. Um, you made me think of something interesting. Um, so we hear so much about AI and what it can and can't do, and is it going to take all our jobs? Is it all overblown and all this? And I'm not going to try to answer any of those questions because nobody has. It's just an ongoing conversation. I don't think there are any answers. However,
Right.
I think AI can turn you into a manager in a sense, right? So let's say you're not normally overseeing folks working under you on a team, but you have AI. You can start to flex your muscles in that way to sort of to review another like an agentic AI person, right? Another person or an AI's output, which is really, really interesting. It's like having a really, really good employee. So I just wanted to sort of mention that. Let's get into a little bit of a deeper dive here in the time we have left, right? So,
Right.
um, what are some practical criteria or indicators that you might recommend for assessing whether an HRIS challenge can be solved through optimization or through a full scale vendor change? Like what is there to look for? Can I keep my system and just tweak it, or do I need to just, rip and replace?
Uh, no, that's a very, very important question, and it has got to do with millions of dollars, right? So let's first make sure that every thought or every change that we want to look at has got the right budget, right? We're trying to, if we're implementing a new system, it has got to do with money. So let's keep that thought process in mind while we'll dwell into this, right? The first thing I would say is the user experience. I always come back to the same stuff, right? It is all about how a particular system is making you feel when you use it. It can be to do with the whole configuration, the capabilities, the limitation, or the processes in general. But if the system is not helping you to provide the best user experience, it's time for change,
Yeah.
right? It's as simple as that. Um, but then we can argue stating that, hey, I can go back and fix all of my user experience and all of that. But once we have a negative perception about a system, especially with the user experience, nothing else matters, right? First impression makes the best impressions. It has got to do with the systems as well, right? If you do not have the first right impression about a system, you will not see the user adoption, right? Then there will be a problem. Um, I would say, and it sounds sort of silly, do I actually have to change my system just because people don't like it? That is the case, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if you see that people are not using it, it's time for a change. But if it's got to do with bare minimum processes changes, data fixes and stuff, go for it. But
Mhm.
um, many times you would need to change the system if the user experience is bad.
One thing that I want to kind of insert here too is that among all the other really insightful
Yeah.
um, tidbits of info that you just shared is you know there's a vendor responsibility here too, right? There's plenty of great systems out there that are implemented poorly. Maybe because there's a poor handoff from sales to customer success on the vendor side. There's no rhyme or reason, not enough direction for the customer, and then that sets the vendor up for failure because once a system is improperly or suboptimally implemented and deployed, everything that goes wrong is this sort of the knee-jerk reaction is to blame the vendor for something. And I've spoken with folks out there where yeah, it was the vendor's fault under those scenarios, but if those implementations had been done right, it definitely would not have been the vendors. There were things that happened that probably weren't, objectively speaking, the vendor's fault, but because of the dynamics, it turned out to be the vendor's fault. And so there's a lot there. And so when you're if you make a decision as an organization to, hey, we're going to make a full scale vendor change, or to keep your vendor even, but let's talk about the former first, right? Make sure you choose a vendor that has a very, that you research what their approach is like post sale, right? Once it's actually in your hands and deployed. And if you have smaller challenges, you want to keep your vendor, but maybe you want to, think about strengthening that relationship with the vendor, figuring out a way to get sort of next level attention.
That's true. That's true. And it all again has to do with how the vendor is responding to your questions or challenges, correct? It all boils down to the overall user experience. And when I say user experience, not just the system level experience, but also how the vendor is interacting with the organization in general, right? So you're spot on, Brent. I think we should be also looking at that approach. Again, I've read this somewhere. If you've taken a wrong train, just get out of it as soon as possible. Otherwise, you'll end up so far from your
Yeah,
destination. And I
yeah.
think it's fair when it comes to systems as well. You've bought on a system, it doesn't really work. Don't just spend more money trying to fix it if it's already broken. Just get out on your train, and
Yeah, right, that's right. There's nothing wrong with sort of, like just, as my grandfather used to say, sometimes in life you have to punt, you didn't get to the end zone, just try it for the next time. Ram, thank you so much for joining us today. We could talk about this for much longer. It's a 20-minute podcast or so. This is a really illuminating conversation. It's something that people need to paying attention to.
Thank you so much, Brent. This was lovely talking to you, and thank you for so much. Thank you so much for having me on this again.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at hr.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.